Thank you. I just wanted to see that we were live streaming. Very good. Okay. Happy Thursday, everybody. We will call this meeting of the Environmental Sustainability Committee to order. It is 4:06 p.m. Could I have a mover and a seconder for adoption of the minutes of our last meeting? So thank you, Mark. Thank you, Jamie. So Mark to move, Jamie to second. Any questions, concerns, additions, deletions for the minutes? Seeing none, all those in favor of approving the minutes of September 9th, if you could, perfect. Thank you for raising your hand. For those of you who are on the phone, which I believe from a committee side is just Pedro. Pedro, if you have any objection to anything, please say so. Otherwise, we will assume that your silence means you are in approval. Is that all right?
Yeah, that's all right. Thank you.
You're welcome. All right. Do we have any declarations of pecuniary interest from anyone today? I see none. Thank you very much. Moving on to our agenda. For today's agenda, could I have someone to move and second the approval of today's agenda? Thank you. Oh, she moved. Bhavna, Ramaz, there she is. Thank you, Ramaz, to move. And they're bouncing. And someone to second, please. Thank you, Jamie. I appreciate that. Any additions or deletions from the agenda? And seeing none, be it resolved that our agenda for today is as presented is approved. All in favor? Thank you. That's carried. All right. We're moving on to the Sault Ste. Marie Public Library Thermal Camera Lending Program. And I see that Matthew McDonald is here from the library. Emily, would you like to move ahead with this item, please?
Sure, absolutely. Welcome, Matthew, to the Environmental Sustainability Committee. You all would have received in your agenda packages last week the application, our very first application with the newly developed electronic form for the Green Initiatives Fund. So you will all have had a chance to hopefully review the application submitted by the library. They have an intention to purchase 4 infrared imaging cameras and loan those out as part of their lending program for residents of Sault Ste. Marie who are interested in looking for areas of heat loss within their homes. Is sort of one of the preliminary steps in making your house a little bit more energy efficient. So I'm not sure if Matthew, there's anything that you'd like to add to that. Perhaps by a show of hands, has everyone had a chance to take a look at the application? Excellent. I'm seeing nods and hands. Perfect. Great. So I don't know if there's any summary points that you'd like to add there, and then we can maybe just jump into any questions that anyone has about the project.
I don't think I have anything to add, but I'm here definitely to answer any questions that you might have regarding the lending program.
Great. Perfect. Thank you, Matthew. I'll add to this that this is a program that I've actually been a part of in another community when I was working in Wawa. We purchased 2 of the cameras. So it's not only here in the north, there's also some examples in the agenda package that give examples of other communities. So perhaps I'll turn it over to the committee and ask if anyone has any questions for Matthew about the application.
Sure, yeah, I can start it off.
Thanks, Jamie.
Oh, jumped in there on Pedro, I think. Sorry, Pedro, if that was you. Matthew, I think it's a great idea. I love the program. Is there any additional resources that come along with kind of taking the camera out, like lending it out? Or is there some sort of training package or materials that people can use to know what they're looking at?
Currently not, because we haven't developed a package or anything like that, but it's certainly something that we could include. Certainly if we have information about some grants or anything like that that homeowners could apply for, we could always include that in the kit, as well as a list of resources that they could follow, either online resources or books within the library that they could access in order to maybe do home improvements. And then each kit would definitely include information on how to use the cameras and what the data represents.
Okay, great. Thanks, Matthew.
Pedro, did you have a question?
Yeah, I have a question. So there are, I believe, 4 cameras available that will be available. So then if they, what was the rationale to get 4? Will they be under or oversubscribed? And also, what happens? I don't know how strong they are. What happens if they break? What's the deal? What's the process if they break, for example? Thank you.
So it depends. I mean, if a user were to break them, there is the requirement to replace it on their behalf. So they would be charged with replacement. If it were to break while we have it, then it would be the library's responsibility for replacement. Say it gets overuse or something like that, or somebody brings it back and they say, well, I borrowed this, but it's no longer working. And then the library would be responsible for fixing it. Same as if there were any losses. So if somebody were to borrow it and not return it, that's also another concern. That person would still be responsible for it. And we do have the ability to send people to the collections agency to recoup costs for expensive kits like this that go missing because somebody's borrowed it and not returned it. And we have a number of other kits that we do lend for homeowners. So we have radon kits that the library lends. So you can detect whether or not you have radon gas in your basement. So that has been a very successful program. And that was funded through the Lung Association of Ontario. Did that answer your question?
Oh, well, what was it for cameras? Is the pilot probably?
Hey, Pedro, we're having a little trouble hearing you on the phone. It got staticky there.
Sorry about that. I was just asking why four cameras?
Oh, we got to start somewhere. So we figured we'd start with 4. We decided 2 at each location to distribute them into different parts of the city. We can relocate them. So if there's more demand at the Centennial Library, we can always move one over here. But it's to allow multiple homeowners to do audits of their home at the same time.
Okay, thank you.
Anyone else with questions about this program?
Yeah, I've got a question.
Go ahead, Eric.
How did you pick this particular model of camera? Because I know these vary quite a bit in terms of cost and feature.
This one was actually recommended to us. Emily helped us do a little bit of research there because she had experience working with another community on a similar project. So that's kind of where we went in terms of the model of camera.
So these ones were probably, Emily, successful in whatever other city it was. Like they were probably fairly user friendly and. Yeah.
That's exactly it.
Okay, thanks.
Okay. Anyone else with questions before we put our motion forward? Actually, I think I probably did that in backwards order anyways. Okay, fantastic. So could I have someone to move and to second the approval of the $2,120 from the Green Initiatives CDF fund to support the library's efforts to have thermal imaging cameras available for the public to borrow? Looking for a couple of, thank you, Mark. Thank you, Jamie. All right. Anything further on this item? And if not, all those in favor of supporting the funding request? I see. Thank you, everyone. Perfect. Okay. All right, Matthew. Well, away you go.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, everyone.
You're welcome. You're welcome. I'm really curious to see the take up and how that's going to come together. All right, moving on. we have now with us Peter Tenazzo from the Planning Department, who is going to take us through the city's planning development goals as it relates to the new official plan. And we're going to then have some conversation and discussion about the notes that we made at our last meeting about what we felt was important in terms of urban design and official plan, et cetera, and how we bring all that together and be able to share thoughts with Peter and do some back and forth on that and see where we get to with this. So I think Peter has a presentation that was included in our package to start with, and then we will go from there. Did I get that right, Emily?
You did, Donna.
Thank you. All right, Peter, thanks for being here.
Thank you. Thank you very much for having me, and many thanks to the group for putting together these comments. I think you're on point. And unfortunately, I don't think this group had the benefit of looking through the comprehensive background document when you put these together. So I think Emily has sent that around to the group. So I hope you don't mind. I'm sharing my screen here. Can everybody see title page to my?
Yes.
Yeah, okay, good. So I've really broken this. It's not even really a presentation. It's more of just discussion points. I've broken it into two parts. I know we've got about 45 minutes or so, I understand. So I want the majority of it to be a discussion. So the first little bit here, I'm going to race through this. It's kind of the basics of planning and what the official plan is. I'm not going to go that fast, but anyways, planning in Ontario, we're a policy-led planning system. And in many respects, I like to look at it as a hierarchy. At the top of the hierarchy, you've got the Planning Act, and then there's just a tangled web in many respects of various provincial legislations that are applicable to the Planning Act and planning in some way, shape, or form. And then below that, you've got your provincial plans. In Northern Ontario, really, we've got two provincial plans that impact us, and the most prominent of that would be the Provincial Policy Statement 2020. And then we've also got the Growth Plan for Northern Ontario. Now, once you get into the green area here, I think you can see my cursor. As you move down this sort of hierarchy, you become more local. Everything blue here is obviously provincial. That's not to say there isn't some federal legislation in there, but primarily it's provincial. In terms of local planning, the official plan is the top local planning document. It has to be consistent with provincial plans. And then you've got sort of, at the more local level, at the neighborhood, and in some cases, individual site-specific level, you've got your various municipal planning tools like zoning bylaws and site plan control. And those things have to be consistent with your official plan, which has to be consistent with provincial plans, which has to be, as you go up, everything has to be consistent. Basics of an official plan: it is a statutory document. It's the top local land use document. OP amendments should be rare. And as I mentioned, they have to be consistent. The official plan has to be consistent with the provincial policy statement. Now, as far as our new official plan project, as I mentioned earlier, we have recently gone public with a comprehensive official plan background report. It's about 250 pages, and it's based on really three things. It's what we know, what we heard, and then what we propose. And I do note that environmental sustainability is a key theme. Again, it's available online at this link. We can also email you a PDF, but the emailable PDF is somewhat compressed, so you'll lose some of the detail, especially when you get into the mapping and some of the mapping products. In terms of next steps, we're going to consult on the OP background report, and at the same time, we're drafting a new official plan, which we hope to present a draft version to council in January. We will then consult upon that over the course of January to April, which will include a provincial review. And then in May, we want to present the draft OP to council for adoption, and then ultimately the province for new official plans. The province is actually the approval authority. They have the ability to modify the OP, and there's no real appeal mechanism if they do modify it, which is why we want to take the time here in the new year to get preliminary comments. Some notes and consultation. Again, you can email me directly. My contact info is at the end of this presentation, which I believe everybody has a copy of. We're happy to attend any specific event or meeting that you or someone you know may be part of, please reach out to us and we're happy to do that. We will be having 3 in-person open houses and then 1 Zoom-based open house for those that are comfortable attending in person. And then we've got a whole list of organizations that we've already scheduled meetings with, but we're open to meeting with whomever, so please reach out. Okay, so now into the points that were raised by the Environmental Sustainability Committee, and again, much appreciated. And in general, I think you guys are on point. So I've taken the liberty, I've sort of paraphrased your points. So I hope I haven't mischaracterized anything. I did have a few conversations with Emily, and I think I have a general understanding of where you're going, but by all means, I don't want to do all the talking here, so I'll just briefly kind of talk about what we're proposing in some of these areas, and then I'll open the floor up. We don't need to be formal here. I don't know if there's a formal procedure here, but by all means, don't wait till the end. Just jump in and stop me from talking, and we'll go where the conversation goes. So 2 of the points in terms of urban design, centralized key infrastructure, I'm assuming you kind of meant centralized development. And then prioritize affordability and accessibility when developing new infrastructure or development. And I think the overall focus of the group was like to kind of centralize everything in one location. Now, the downtown will continue to be a strong focus area, and we'll continue to promote the concept of complete neighborhoods, which is a mixed use neighborhood. When I say complete neighborhood, it's a place where you can live and have easy, close by pedestrian access to the wide variety of amenities that you require, whether it's shopping, services, social services, recreational needs. We want to try to keep that in one neighborhood. When you centralize things, you don't necessarily get a complete neighborhood. And really what we're hoping to do, and we had a lot of debate about this, because ultimately, yeah, there was a discussion about centralizing things, but we have to also be cognizant of some of the legacy development that we have in the community. And what we're proposing at this point is to build upon existing nodes, corridors, and activity hubs, which aren't necessarily centralized. So I'll give 2 examples here. And really in those areas to try to prioritize development that fills whatever land use gap may exist. So I'll give 2 examples. Daisy Road is one example. Daisy Road has a fair bit of higher density development and legacy approvals for more higher density development. But if you live in Terry Fox Place or any one of those apartments and you don't drive or you don't choose to drive, where are you going grocery shopping? Quite a ways away down Trunk Road. So you're, quite literally, you're having to hop in your car, you're having to take a cab, take a bus to go grocery shopping. That's not necessarily ideal, especially in areas of the community where you might have affordable units, subsidized units, where people don't necessarily have access to a vehicle, or they're having to take a costly, taxi ride to get there. So Daisy Road, for example, the land use gap there might be commercial amenities. So we may look at having, and prioritizing developments that fill that particular land use gap in that particular area. Great Northern Road being another example. Let's take the Walmart area. There's some residential development around there, but there's room for a lot more. And again, that concept of complete neighborhoods isn't necessarily about segregating commercial from residential. It's about integrating appropriate commercial with appropriate residential. So there are vacant lots around Great Northern Road that could be appropriately developed for higher density residential. And imagine living in a dwelling there. You would have virtually all the amenities that you would require within a 5 to 10 minute walk. So that's from an overall urban development standpoint, land use standpoint, that's sort of the approach that we're taking. Rather than clawing back and trying to centralize things, we're looking to try to develop the land use gaps that may exist in some of these areas. Another example would be way out Second Line West. We've actually got public housing out there, subsidized housing. Those folks may or may not drive, but they're not really close to a lot of amenities that they would require to go about their weekly or daily lives. So the plan going forward is to try to prioritize development that might fill those gaps, as opposed to clawing back and centralizing everything. So I'm not sure if anyone has any comments or questions on that piece, because I think that that is a significant piece that's a little different than what I sort of read into, when I saw the comments.
Peter, Andre, just 2 seconds, Andre. Peter, I'm thinking as I'm listening to you here, perhaps we could do questions in each section as we go along. So
Sure.
just to kind of deal with each of the bullets, and then your bullets within that, and then we'll move on, to the next section. Andre, go ahead.
Yes, Peter, I couldn't agree more about your comments on this concept. And I just, for myself, I've been in the Sioux for 40 years. And 40 years ago, we had a larger population, and we had a very vibrant, what you call those neighborhoods, as you call. We had Cora Road was very active, a lot of support there, a lot of small shops. We had the downtown was very alive and well. We had a lot of areas that have these small commercial zones providing a baker, a butcher. There was food, and there was different stores. And I think we all know what happened, and what basically went away from that kind of development is we allowed big box to come to town, and that changed everything. So big box, Walmart, Home Depot started the trend, and then of course they put all the small businesses out of business. They promised us to lower prices, more jobs, but at the end of the day, that's not what happened. And I don't believe that's a trend that's happened all over the world, and it's very wrong-headed. And I know there are cities to counter that trend that have imposed limits on the size of stores. And those communities, that actually helps to create the type of city that has the type of node that you're mentioning. So I don't know if the official plan addresses that, because I think it's very difficult to create that atmosphere when there's only one store that sells and everybody goes to that one store to shop, right? And that's exactly the point that you're making. So again, I don't know if there's any way to reverse that trend, or do we put a restriction on the size of stores, which some cities have done in the world, and have created again the Main Street model and the small neighborhood shop. So that's just my observation, and I don't know if the official plan is what it takes to reverse or to basically stop that trend. So your thoughts perhaps on that?
Yeah, that's interesting. We've had a similar around the coffee machine discussion. To play devil's advocate, the one thing about a big store, and let's use Walmart, they've got big shoulders, they can take it. And I'm not suggesting by any means that I actually haven't been in Walmart in years, but the thing about Walmart is one-stop shop. So fewer vehicle trips, right? Because they do sell everything. Now that's the one piece. I'm not aware of anyone in North America that's sort of said, okay, we're going to take certain types of stores and say you can only be so big. Andre, I don't know that would be feasible in Sault Ste. Marie, and I'm not sure of the unintended consequences.
Sure. I understand that, Peter. I mean, I think there are, I know of some examples. I follow the website Strong Towns, and they always have a lot of these examples, and it's a wonderful, wonderful resource. And I think there's a place in California where they have done exactly that, where they basically said there's a size limit to stores. And of course, they also try to reduce parking, so we don't have these big sea of parkings. The other thing that Strong Towns makes the point is that from a city perspective, when you look at the cost per acre to provide services to an area like the downtown compared to an area like Walmart block, the same area, the revenue to the city and the cost to the city is very much inverse. So it's a low tax revenue and a high cost to service. And the other comment about the driving, yes, I agree that they do everything in one place, so you don't drive as much. On the other side of that, though, if to do like every day go shopping for a few groceries instead of driving in your car across town, parking in a lot that's so big that it takes you 10 minutes to cross it to find a spot, going to a store that's so big by the time you get to the end. So if you have a local butcher or a local bakery and a small, so the staples that you get every few days, then you send one of your kids around the corner to buy a bag of milk, those are the good old days. And I don't know, why we moved away from that. And I think we need to think about how wrong-headed big box was for all of us in North America. So anyways, we have a climate crisis. We need to change the way we live. We got used to driving everywhere. And yes, so I think the official plan is, but we need to look at that more critically. Anyways, my thoughts.
Thanks.
Okay.
Thanks, Andre. Anyone else have something to ask or like comments? Thanks, Mark. Go ahead.
Just so when we talk about complete neighborhoods and mixed use neighborhoods, has there been given much thought or examples of cases of how do you attract some of these stores or mixed use businesses to these neighborhoods? We pick on Walmart and that's fine. I agree they got big enough shoulders, we can. But when you're trying to, attract mixed use businesses to these neighborhoods and things like that, and, bring business owners or entrepreneurs into that neighborhood, and, they're essentially competing against the big box stores, the Walmarts and things like that. Is there things that, the OP can do to incentivize or attract these businesses to take that chance, to take that risk, to go into these neighborhoods? Because, the benefit or the plus side, I guess, to your Walmarts is it's one location, they know people are coming to it. You attract a small business in a neighborhood, you can't guarantee that everybody in that neighborhood is going to come there. So now you're minimizing or limiting your audience, I guess, is what you talk about. So that is, I guess, some of the flip side to, talking about mixed use neighborhoods or complete neighborhoods, from that type of, I guess, from a master plan type or a official plan type of view. How do you start to overcome some of that stuff?
That's a great question and a great comment, Mark, and nice to see you, by the way. Excuse me. That's the $1 million question. Legally, can we incentivize mixed use development, neighborhood commercial? Mixed use development largely non-existent in this community. I'm not 100% sure why. I think part of the problem is that in bigger centers that have higher growth, they're planning 1,000-unit developments. And within that 1,000 dwelling unit development, they're saying you're going to have a little main street here, and this is where the butcher and vegetable shops can go, and this is where these various commercial areas would be. We're infilling a few units at a time, maybe 50, maybe 100 units. So it's a little more, it's a little difficult. It's more difficult to be, to plan up front that way when you're doing more infill. I'll go back to the comment about Daisy Road and Great Northern Road. And it's that whole, if you build it, will they come? And that's, I'm not going to say it's the experiment, but you've got density on Daisy Road. You've got planned more density. When we first started this, we thought, well, we've got to claw back on that. We've got to, we've got to rezone and downzone those areas because they're at the periphery of the community. But then we're ignoring the density and the apartments that are already there. And we're creating a situation where we're just exacerbating the land use gap that exists. So what we're suggesting is that we're going to build upon these existing nodes, corridors, and activity hubs. And if there's that much more density, for example, and that many more dwelling units out, and the East End's kind of fickle this way. There's no commercial, really neighborhood commercial in the East End. But if there's enough residences out on Daisy Road, might that create the market for some small scale commercial? Which there was a little bit that was actually happening out in front of White Pines there at the old MG Daisy school, but it didn't last. So that is a challenge, Mark. And then the Great Northern Road example, I mean, that one's easy, right? Because the commercial is there. It's actually, I think, a little bit easier to get the residential near the commercial than it is to get the commercial to come out near the residential areas. So I'm not sure if I answer your question. Legally we can put incentives in place. I don't know, there's a lot of incentives that are out there, and one of the themes that I hope this comes through in this presentation as well as the background document. We have an official plan from 1996 that has very little in the way of incentives, a lot in the way of prohibitions. So it's that carrot versus stick approach. And we're trying to get away from the stick and get towards the carrot. And the downtown's a prime example. Rather than trying to force people to be where they don't want to be, we want to make the downtown a place that people want to be. And that's what we're trying to change.
Anything else, Mark, that you wanted to ask on this particular point or section, I guess?
Not off the top of my head, no.
Okay, thanks. Anyone else on affordability and accessibility section? Seeing none, I don't believe. Oh, great, Peter, let's move on.
Okay. Now let's get to parking reform. Andre, this is a very interesting concept. By parking reform, I just want to make sure that I'm right to assume that we're talking about like establishing maximum parking ratios, or if you're X business, you can only have this many parking spaces. You can't have a surplus. Am I correct in?
Partially.
Partially, okay.
Yeah. So I've been doing a lot of, as a businessman many years ago, when I asked for a parking exemption for Belarusian, I thought, why is it the city telling me how big of a parking lot I need as a business? I the one who should decide that. But anyways, that was the thought then, and then they granted me the exemption. But I'd never let that go, and I've done a lot of work. So there's a lot of group and information. So what happens? There's two things about parking reform. Is not about. It's about utilizing the parking we have optimally. So the problem now is we have at times not enough parking, and at times we have too much parking. And so how can we optimize the space that's used for parking? For example, it's a tragedy when we want people to live downtown. And if you want people to live downtown, then we need buildings so people can live downtown and have businesses downtown. And we tear two buildings, so we have a parking lot, big parking lot for the drugstore that was built there. So that's the kind of things that I go like, it's so counter to what we're trying to do. Is we want more people living downtown, but there's no place to build buildings because 3/4 of the space or even more is occupied by paid parking. So what cities have done is changed the management of parking from one that is controlled by bylaws, but switched to something that is controlled by the market. So we have the parking becomes valuable, and the value of parking changes depending on the demand. So the goal would be that in any given block, because if there's not enough parking, what happens is people drive around creating pollution looking for a parking spot. So and if there's too much parking, so then you undervalue parking and you have all this vacant space that could be used for either green space or commercial or residential, etc. So in a short term, so what happens is you have a system in San Francisco. They're doing this right now, where you create the fluctuating price to parking so that there's always 2 available parking spots on every street. So in other words, if the parking gets filled up, the price of parking goes up. So if you don't want to, if you want to park in a certain spot, you can, but you have to pay more because it's a prime spot.
So it's like dynamic pricing.
Dynamic pricing, that's correct. And then there's a lot of research on that. So that's an interesting concept. And the other thing about that makes this a win-win for everything, because excess parking is expensive on so many levels, and so many people, it costs on so many levels, and that cost is not absorbed by the driver himself. It's absorbed by taxpayers. It's absorbed by, the pavement runoff, the maintenance, the city, the taxpayers, and so on. So the idea to allow the market to dictate the price and the value of parking actually helps to control it. So these have these really clever systems. So there's always available parking. And then if people, and we see that in every big city. And I know Sault Ste. Marie it's a hot topic, but I would really like to understand, I think a lot of our parking bylaw, especially with regards to the research that I found, are very antiquated, to put it politely. And I think we are far from best practice in parking management. And I think we have a lot of work to do. And it infuriates me when I ask for, looking at this issue, and I'm basically told that, no, it's not a problem. And I'm going, well, we don't even know how much parking we have. We don't even know how that relates to other progressive cities, not only in Northern Ontario, but in North America and Europe, and how they manage it. So I think there's an opportunity to review how we handle parking and how we optimize it to maximize land use to so we can have people living at just a quick example. Let's say, for example, Station Mall. I understand that the big stores are closed, but let's say we take the south parking lot in St. Mary's River Drive, and we decide that a developer, you don't have any parking restrictions there. You can build whatever you want, and you can build whatever size parking lot you want, and then decide the value of parking and develop that area for condos. I mean, it's the most beautiful part of the city, and it's a one big parking lot and a big road that doesn't go anywhere. And I find that tragic, because this is probably the gem of the city right there, the most beautiful view, etc. And all it is one huge parking lot. So it's kind of a symbolic tragedy, and it's right beside City Hall. You look around City Hall, you look around all these big parking lots everywhere. So anyways,
Andre,
I'll stop. Yeah.
it's okay. I know you're very passionate about this topic, and it's really valid, and the ideas you're sharing are very important. I just want to see, does anyone else want to, what you're talking about is, it's like a complete mind shift, mind shift. About parking and why we have it and how much we have and how we use it and how we maximize or minimize or whatever. It's just a different way of thinking about things. And in a community like ours, that's not something we've had to do before, or we've tried to do before or whatever. But before we move on from parking, because I think Peter's getting the gist of the concepts there. Does anyone else want to contribute anything in particular? Because I want to make sure we have ample time to cover all the points here on the parking issue. Anyone else want to wade in? No. Pedro? No, I can't. Okay. Peter, does that help you understand how everyone's feeling about that particular?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and Andre, just very, very briefly, you're correct. The background document really didn't get into any kind of detail with parking. So that's a notable omission from us. And we're committed to kind of a comprehensive review of that. As far as the OP is concerned, for us, it's I think you're talking about something a little more in depth than what the OP would look at, which would be like, how do you price parking and dynamic pricing? That's really interesting. Just keeping in mind, and not to play devil's advocate, but obviously we have to look through this through a lot of different lenses. And as I'm sure Councillor Hilsinger would know, when we're dealing with various developments, a perceived lack of parking is always top of mind for neighbors. Now, it could be, a misinformed, and generally it is, but oftentimes lack of parking is the biggest issue that we deal with. Have to know parking signs that you see on streets. And I know you have a unique opinion on parking on the street, but oftentimes what that is a business is doing quite well. Their parking spills over onto the road and the neighbors ask for no parking signs. And I understand that roads aren't meant as parking lots, but ultimately you're right. Parking is a hot button issue. And I would leave by saying, if there was a good problem to have in a downtown, a lack of parking would be a very good problem to have. So we're hoping we get to a problem where we really have a lack of parking in the downtown. I don't think we're quite there yet, but in any event, you guys, there was a comment here, creative, pedestrian friendly and community and culture. We hope that the proposed policy directions in the OP background document reflect this. And certainly we're pretty excited about the new, the coming, new active transportation plan. Andre, you've been here for 40 years. I thought you were 35 years old, but I've been here for close to that amount. I think if there's one change that I can say that I've seen in this community in the last 15 years, it's on active transportation. I think we were way behind the curve 15 years ago. I think we're still behind the curve, but I think we've gone ahead leaps and bounds. So let's maybe leave it at that. And in the essence of time here, maybe move on. Green space, very interesting. And certainly I read with some interest here, increasing pollinator gardens. Emily, I believe you had a discussion with Travis Reed about this, as did I. We don't have any specific policies on pollinator gardens. I can say that our park staff aim to plant 2 to 3 a year. Now, these types of gardens in parks generally require significant staffing to maintain. So there's obviously an operational, a budget concern here. And then, I think some of the feedback that Parks has heard is that, as far as planting a pollinator garden in a grass field in Bellevue Park, that might be troublesome to certain users who may throw a frisbee, play cricket, do whatever they do in that grass fields. But having said that, there are a lot of places where I think we could plant pollinator gardens or allow some of these green spaces to renaturalize. So we do have specific policies that we're proposing to allow certain spaces to renaturalize. Again, there is a caution here that, if the grass isn't cut on a regular basis, oftentimes, there's a phone call from the neighbors, and, there is a push right now locally to really enforce property standards, and grass cutting is always at the top of the list for that. So although we do have that policy in there that we'd like to see some areas renaturalized for a variety of reasons, I do caution that there may be some complaints. And then we do specifically support partnerships to allow groups to come in and plant on city or other public property. I'm not sure if there's anyone that's involved with the Sioux Naturalists here, but they, I believe, as we speak, are planting a pollinator garden out in the West End flood control channel, just west of the West End sewage treatment plant. So that's as far as pollinator gardens. Does anyone have any questions or comments on that?
I'm going to ask Eric, because this was one of the points that he had brought forward to us. Eric, can you comment on that, on what Peter just said, and perhaps that, I don't know, a little bit of resistance to what's really neat versus what's good for the environment, et cetera?
I guess I would just say that, I'm a huge Bellevue Park user. There's lots of room to throw frisbees, and there's lots of room to put pollinator gardens too.
And there's plans to put more. Eric, I'm in Bellevue Park. I live near there. I'm there every day. And yeah, you're right. There is room to put more. And I know that the city is certainly, like I say, the plan is 2 to 3 new ones a day. And from a staffing standpoint, Bellevue Park is one of the more efficient places to do it because our park staff are there.
Yeah. I don't know. I don't have any major resistance to put up here. I think it's good to hear that there's a push towards putting pollinator gardens up. And I would just say that I just think that there is a lot of room for them, and I don't think it would really impede on people's ability to use the grass fields. And also, there is some maintenance to these gardens, but I don't know. I think if you actually compare that to the maintenance of grass fields, it's in some ways, in some forms of resources, it's actually far less maintenance. So
Now, Eric, just to ask you a question, and sort of the approach and the discussion that I've sort of had with Travis and we've had around planning is that it doesn't necessarily, and this may come off wrong, but does it really matter where the pollinator garden is? And the reason I say that is, if it's in Bellevue Park, I think there's a certain standard that the public requires. Whereas, you know, the pollinator garden that's going to go out on the West End flood channel, it won't require the maintenance, and I'm assuming it's going to be relatively maintenance free.
No, that's a good point. And so first off, the whole focus on Bellevue Park was kind of accidental because when that whole thing came up, I was just mentioning Bellevue Park as an example, and then that's kind of what got honed in on.
Okay.
So that's one thing and I get your point of the, you know, maybe that's not the best place to put it. But on the other hand, there is the advantage of putting these in high visibility areas, as at least some of them, as a demonstration of, you know, what that actually looks like compared to just a lawn, and to sort of encourage, because there are actually people in the city that, you know, pollinator garden their lawns and you know. So anyways, I was never actually suggesting originally that it should all just be in.
No, and I didn't think you were. No.
Yeah.
Okay. And one other question, Eric, or anyone that's an expert. When I think pollinator garden, and we're going to get to this later about like planting, you know, a native resilient species, but generally speaking, if I'm planting flowers, can I call that a pollinator garden? Or is it more complex? And we can go offline with this discussion. Am I off base there in thinking that way, or?
No, I mean, there are sort of certain flowers that are more
better. Okay.
Yeah, but I mean, okay. Generally you're right. And you know, there is amazing garden space in Bellevue already that is beautiful, and, you know, in some ways underappreciated for how nice it is.
And I like I said, I walk my dog there every day, and it's pretty, I see a new twist on something every day that I'm walking. So anyways, we'll move on. Eric, are you good with that?
Yep.
Okay. In terms of the urban tree canopy study and practicing forest management and tree planting, planning is, you know, we're supportive of an urban tree canopy study. We've had some conversations with Emily about that. So certainly we're supportive of that. As far as, you know, tree cutting that happens, the OP policies right now, we do support the implementation of a scope tree bylaw. About every 4 to 5 years, it comes up. We need a tree bylaw in Sault Ste. Marie, and there's always a lot of pushback. We want to try to nudge the door open a little bit, if you will, and maybe have a scope tree bylaw that would apply to sensitive areas such as wetlands, significant slopes, riparian zones. So we're hoping that in the coming, you know, obviously the OP isn't the place to have the tree bylaw because that's actually passed under the Municipal Act. But the OP does support a scope tree bylaw, which I think could go away in ensuring that wetlands aren't clear cut or significant slopes aren't clear cut, because my understanding right now is that even though a significant slope may be under the jurisdiction of the Conservation Authority, you're allowed to cut the tree, you just can't take the stumps out. The theory being that the stumps hold the ground until the vegetation grows back. But having said that, and you know what, the scope tree bylaw could also look at some sort of these heritage areas, you know, the Simpson, Leo, Upton, McGregor area, for example, where I'm of the opinion that the trees, you know, the matured vegetation actually forms a pretty important part of the character of those areas. McGregor, not so much anymore, but we digress on that. And then in terms of the OP right now, the policy framework, and I can sort of switch my screens here and we can look at it if you wish, or you can go online and look Schedule C. Anything that's basically a shade of green on Schedule C are lands that will remain largely undeveloped over the next 20 years, which is the life frame of the plan. And that's about 35% of the community. So the Precambrian uplands, which is north of the Shield area. That's all a no development zone. Obviously, we've got some significant park space, Hiawatha Highlands, some wetlands throughout the community, some of our ravine areas. Those are all by policy intended to remain undeveloped and naturalize the way that they are. So certainly if the group would like to go in a little bit more detail there, I can show you kind of where some of those spots are, but it's about a third of the community, plus or minus.
So this is Peter, oops, gosh, this is hard to do backwards. So this is the document that Peter's referring to that's in the appendices section of the backgrounder that's visually showing the green space. I have that right, correct, Peter? This is number C?
Yes. I'm not seeing your screen, but I can stop sharing mine.
No, it's okay.
No?
It's okay. That's okay. No worries.
Okay.
It's in the back.
Open here. I could it's there. You know what? If we have time at the end, we'll come back to it.
Let's do that. I'm worried about running out of time. So
Yeah.
let's keep going. Thanks.
Okay. And plant diverse native, non-native species, resilient to climate change, providing high levels of carbon sequestration. And I always get that. I always stumble over that word. So I'm going to try not to say it again. We do have policies that speak to, you know, whether it's a public project or private plantings as part of a landscaping requirement, that it's a diversity of species, that we would prefer native species, but if they're non-native, they need to be non-invasive and resilient to climate change. We have that wording in, but we don't speak to high levels of carbon sequestration. So we're going to add that in. That's a really good point. So we're going to add that in. Certainly there's other things that we need to consider. But in my discussions with various city folks, what we would be interested in maybe tapping into this group or others would be to develop a list, a preferred planting list or a required planting list that basically lists off the species, obviously that we would like to see planted as part of any public projects or through private projects. For example, we're seeing a lot of, or we've seen, you know, not on the public side, but on the private side, we've seen, you know, projects that are speccing Norway maple, for example. And my understanding is that Norway maple is actually kind of an invasive species and don't necessarily do a lot of good for the area. But in any event, I'm not an expert on that. So we certainly would like to work with this group or a special group of individuals to come up with a preferred list of species that we would use. So if anyone has any comments or questions on that.
Peter, I have a comment on that.
Mm-hmm.
This is Pedro Antunes. Thank you for that. Yeah, so I work specifically with invasive species, and I noticed that you use the term non-invasive, and as you just said, if there are no native species available, you'll use a non-invasive, non-native. The problem with that is that a non-native species can become eventually invasive, and there's more probability of a non-native to become invasive than any native species. And I'm not going to get into why that is ecologically, but the point is that it's very important to always utilize native species, and there are good resources, and I'm happy to work with you on choosing native alternatives for all sorts of ecological functions. So that should be something that we need to promote and at all costs not introduce non-native species, irrespective of being invasive or not.
Okay, I appreciate that, and certainly we're willing to look at that for sure, and potentially drop non-invasive. And in a perfect world, I think we'd all rather just have native species being planted here. So Pedro, I may reach out to you through Emily if that's okay.
Absolutely, and I'm sure we will find native alternatives for pretty much everything you need.
Okay, thank you. Any other comments or questions on these points?
Yeah, I have a comment or some questions perhaps. I don't recall having a discussion about providing maybe some or doing some planting in regard to choosing for high carbon sequestration. I think that would be an extremely complicated and difficult task to achieve. Even if you look at wetlands like fens or bogs, like they are high carbon sequestration areas, but based on their very slow levels of decomposition, right? So you have a limit in which, based on other conditions that feed into how much sequestration you're going to get from a certain plant, right? And you even have a little bullet point here that talks about some salt resistance. So presumably you have some areas that are impacted by salts that plants probably don't grow very well in, right? So
Roadsides.
we already have a lot of other compounding factors here that just plant selection might not equal the levels of carbon sequestration that you'd like. So I find that a difficult task to work on.
Okay. And I'm not the expert, so it was in the comments here, and we thought, well, we can simply add that in. But if it's creating more complications, yeah, I'm not sure really what to say about that. I appreciate
Peter?
the comment though. Yeah.
Peter, maybe you and Emily and the team could take
Yeah.
that comment back that Jamie's
Yeah.
provided and sort of mull it over. And then, you know, I'm sure she'd be willing to discuss it further, you know, one-on-one, just to get some more insight into it as well for everyone.
Okay. And Jamie, you had some other questions, I think you.
No, I'm just wondering if, Emily, you know how we talked about like creating projects for carbon offsetting, you know, potentially through planting trees or getting a project, a verified carbon offset credit project created. Is that where maybe this comment came from? Because again, I'm struggling to make the connection from our previous brainstorming session and this comment.
Possibly, it's possible. I mean, when we did send out the summary, you know, the crew hasn't had a chance to really like look it all over. So the additional purpose to this was if there was any feedback on what was taken away in the summary and to clarify it now. So you've definitely hit the nail on the head with that. So thanks.
Yeah, one of your comments here is consider exploring carbon credits as a form of revenue generation for the city's net zero plans. Is that what you're referring to?
Yeah.
Okay. We got to revisit that because I'm not sure that I understand really how carbon credits work to begin with, let alone how our official plan might be able to inform that. So yeah, that's to be discussed further.
Yeah, and I think with that particular comment, it's not so like that the city would become a project developer, more like would partner or would fund a project developer for them to receive funding, and in return, the city get these carbon offset credits that will be needed in the future if you want to claim net zero eventually.
Okay.
So there you go, just some forward thinking on that and some more planning that can be done.
Okay. Are we moving on, or does anyone else have any comments on that?
Looks like we're moving on, Peter.
Okay. Built environment. Okay, so there was certainly a comment here, prioritize retrofitting, you know, vacant buildings in the downtown. One of the cornerstones, one of the major goals of our official plan is to prioritize reusing or retrofitting all existing vacant buildings, not just those in the downtown. So I'm not sure if this is a bit of a different, and I don't know if anyone has concepts or questions or comments on that, but ultimately for us, it's about prioritizing the reuse and retrofitting of all existing vacant buildings, not just those in the downtown. So we do have specific policies that would permit wider, you know, a wider scope of permitted uses, reduced development standards, things of that nature. And we've had some success with allowing, you know, different uses into an area, you know, the school closures, some of the church closures. We've had some success with allowing, let's say, an office space to locate in the middle of a residential neighborhood because it's a vacant building. We would never let someone build something like that new But because if it's a vacant building, we do tend to give a little bit of deference to that because of the benefits of reusing existing vacant buildings. And when they're vacant, it doesn't take them long before the roofs start caving in and then they're gone and they're lost. So that's sort of a comment on that. I don't know if anyone has any comments or questions on that particular point, which is again, retrofitting existing buildings.
Yeah, I was gonna actually, I think I've brought it up a few times or mentioned it a few times already. And I guess I keep going back to how do you get people to take advantage of these and to get into them and to use them. And I think maybe not necessarily part of this plan, but then it's also somewhere in the city or somehow in the city, you start to look at, okay, well, how do we reduce that barrier to entrepreneurship and bring businesses into these types of buildings that, could sit empty because there's just no reason for people to start or move their business there, or, there's ideal locations in certain other areas. So why would you bring your business here? So how do you start to then, promote that entrepreneurship and reduce those barriers to starting those businesses, through rent subsidies or something like that, so that you could help that first 4 years of a new business survive and use these buildings that, elsewise, like you said, would go vacant, collapse, and then be an eyesore because nobody wants to pay to fix it or to clean it up. And I think that's, taking this concept or approach and building on it to support not only just getting the building to be used, but supporting, new business and growth that way too.
We certainly have incentives in the downtown, and there are discussions about potential incentives for reusing or retrofitting existing vacant buildings. I think one thing that hasn't necessarily helped is the commercial vacant tax rebates, where if a commercial building sits vacant, those folks can get a tax rebate on that. So in some cases, it sort of lowers the incentive to get a tenant when you can get your taxes rebated. But that's a different discussion. That's sort of beyond the scope of the official plan. That's a good point. And yeah, there are incentives that are out there, but at the end of the day, Mark, the pot is only so big, and there's a lot of hands looking for that, and certainly the downtown has been the focus of where those incentive dollars have been going in the last 5 years, 10 years.
Okay, let's keep going, Pete.
So in terms of low emission net zero, the OP, ROP and the PPS, the provincial policy statement requires us to have policies encouraging energy efficiency, and as I'm sure everybody knows, those minimum standards are implemented through the Ontario Building Code, which I believe in the last few reiterations, some of the, and I'm not a building code expert, but I believe some of the major changes of the code have really been about energy efficiency. That's, I think, as with the rest of these points, I think that's a bigger sort of financial discussion. I know that, and maybe someone in this group can tell me, do we have any net zero buildings in the Soo?
We have 2 lead buildings.
Okay.
Lead buildings.
The RITAC was one, right?
And the
Soo College building,
yes,
right?
The health unit.
Okay. Yes. Okay.
Yeah.
But we don't have. I don't think we have any net zero buildings yet, right?
Not to my knowledge.
Yeah. That. You know what? We certainly would encourage something like that. I don't know if we, from the official plan standpoint, have the ability to mandate low emission or net zero buildings. I know we don't have the ability or the legal authority to incorporate carbon-based products in construction of new builds, and then the biomass point. Those are things that, unfortunately, we are of the opinion are beyond the scope of the official plan.
But Peter, that doesn't mean they can't be taken up as ideas in a different forum, right? Or under
Absolutely.
a different.
Absolutely. Yeah. The city for sure has the right to do this kind of thing.
Okay.
Not necessarily like in terms of requiring carbon-based products. Like, you know, the last three bullets, it's not necessarily something that we could impose upon the private sector, but it's certainly something that the city could do with city buildings, as with the province could do it with provincial buildings, and the feds could do it with federal buildings too, right? But I don't know that we can currently impose something like that on the private sector.
Jamie, it looks like you wanted to contribute here.
Yeah, I just want to clarify 2 points here. So this is the first I've heard the term net zero building. I've certainly seen and heard of carbon neutral buildings. So maybe we're meaning carbon neutral. I want to clarify that. And when we're talking about incorporating carbon-based products or materials, I think probably the point is that we want to incorporate low carbon-based products and materials into new builds, unless we're talking about a way to repurpose CO2 somehow into products, again, as a sequestration technology, which I've heard of both. So yeah, I guess I just want to be clear with our committee here what it is that we're talking about. Looks like Eric wants to jump in too.
Well, I was, yeah, I mean, I don't know for sure. I don't actually remember the conversation that brought up these points exactly, but I think the incorporate carbon-based products is probably built on the idea of the push for increased use of wood products for purposes beyond the traditional use of wood products because of the CO2 allocation thing that you alluded to, Jamie.
Okay.
So what else I'll do is I'll take back this feedback that we've received today for clarification for our summary points. A lot of material was covered, so thank you for bringing those ideas up.
There's so much to think about. There's just so much to think about. And I'm sure there's things to think about that we don't even realize we need to think about yet. I don't know. It's very, very complex. And we're all just trying to get this right. Because we only get certain chances to create a plan like this. So
and there's a lot of different lenses that we have to look at as well, right? So it's a big project.
Okay. So Peter, I think you have one slide left.
Yeah. And this is similar to the last slide. I agree with certainly both of these comments, especially the groom plow additional portions of the hub trail. I would love to put something in our official plan that speaks to not only grooming, plowing additional portions of the hub trail, but more sidewalks. Unfortunately, that's a broader budget operational discussion. I can say that there are significant portions of the hub trail that weren't designed to be plowed in the winter. I believe they're of a certain base that once you plow them, you drive the frost down further, and we'd be into some significantly more, upgrades and cracking and things of that nature. But I'm not an expert on that. That's certainly something that we will take back though. And that's an ongoing issue for sure.
And Peter, I just want to say this in case, but before, if others want to jump in, certainly. I think that council, from my recollection of the last couple of years, in our meetings has been very supportive through different motions and just sort of conversation in general about expanding our 4-season accessibility to trails. And not just trails, but actually to sidewalks, as you mentioned. So it's certainly, I think there's the support there at the council table to look at how we can fund those things. And I think we shouldn't be nervous or afraid of pushing them forward and coming up with innovative ways of how we can make it how we can make it work both for people that want to use the trails and within the available dollars that we have. So I think there's lots of opportunities.
And I think there's other cities where, like, for example, I have a sidewalk in front of my house and somebody moved in a couple couple doors down from, I believe, Hamilton. And for the first couple snowfalls, he was snow blowing his portion of the sidewalk. So I went and said, well, how come you're doing that? And he said, well, where he was from, they had to do that. So I'm not suggesting that that's a place we go, but I do know that certainly where this gentleman was from in Southern Ontario, recognizing they don't get the snow that we do, but they were responsible for snow blowing their portion of the sidewalk.
Anybody want to share any further thoughts on this last slide, investing in feasibility studies for future projects, or making winter time more accessible, whether it's trails or sidewalks? Mark says it was the same for him in Guelph. He plowed his sidewalk there. But any other comments or guess, and looks, Jamie did that in Calgary too. Fantastic.
Just a quick comment. I same for me where I lived before. It was the same. I had to shovel as well. The difference for me here, and maybe it's just where I live in the city, I don't know, but the difference for me here is that the sidewalk is not only not plowed, but it's actually used as a spot to dump snow by the snow plows, and so I actually can't shovel it even if I wanted to. So
yeah, I'm in the same boat. They dump it by me too because I'm near a corner, but there's places where it can work and places where it can't, right? So it's like any other bylaw. For example, Wellington Street, the city's going to continue to plow that sidewalk and try to find space to put the snow. But in my neighborhood, we've got, even though they are dumping it on the sidewalk, they can dump it on the front yard that is still owned by the city. But obviously, I'm sure there'd be some folks that's a fairly significant change for people. But
okay. Oh, Pedro,
Donna,
go ahead.
Yeah. So my only comment here is that I think the mind frame has to shift and put the pedestrian first and the car second. And this goes for how we design the roads and how we plow the roads. So they go hand in hand. So I think that's what we're probably not doing here, is that we are always thinking about the car first. That was my comment.
Thanks, Pedro. Ramaz has shared that in Regina, she believes they just mandated that residents keep the sidewalks clean around their places. But it's another one of those things that where we have the opportunity to now in I don't know, in my opinion, it's a mind shift thing, right? Like as Pedro just said, and certainly Andre would say many times, right? It's about prioritizing not the vehicle, but the accessibility for everyone, no matter whether you're cycling or walking or using transit or whatever other means of transportation that you have. So does anyone have anything further on anything in general for Peter before we move on to go ahead, Eric?
Yeah, just a general overall reaction. So based exactly what you just said, Donna, everything that I think all the comments we brought forth here, some of them feel a bit out of context at times, but it's because we hadn't actually read the background report before we brought up these comments. So we're just throwing ideas out there. But the general idea that we as a group, I think, are putting forward is more of a mindset shift in general, and a little bit of like, there's some really good stuff in the plan, kind of getting us up to where we should be. And I think we're now sort of thinking about things that are really being a bit more aggressive about where might we want to be in 15 or 20 years from now. And like there are aggressive things that Andre and everybody here are talking about, but in some sense, I think they're actually the way that things are going. Like, for example, if we think about building houses around Walmart, well, I honestly wouldn't be surprised, and I'm not the only one that thinks this, and I'm not an expert in these things, but I wouldn't be surprised if big box stores like Walmart, that trend actually is on the way out with being replaced by online purchasing and deliveries. And that's just accelerating even quicker because of COVID, and all the changes we're experiencing from COVID are not going to go away afterwards. So I think I think we're just thinking about where things need to go in the future and being a little bit aggressive here. And the other last comment is, if any city can take an approach of going back to sort of this little neighborhood approach to things rather than box store approach, like the SUA actually already has the infrastructure for it, as you mentioned, Peter, earlier, and other people discussed as well. Like that's what the city was historically, and that infrastructure hasn't gone away. Obviously, it's not everywhere. There's places like Gacy Road that need it, but that infrastructure is still there. So, I don't know. I mean, I'm not an expert in any of this stuff, but I just think we have to think aggressively. Everybody, not just Sault Ste. Marie, has to think aggressively. There's no reason why the Sioux can't be aggressive on some of these things and be a little bit trend setting. So that's it. That's my final thought here.
Thanks, Eric. Anybody else before we move on just to the last portion of our agenda? I see none. Okay. Thank you, Peter.
Thank you for having me.
As you can see, you have a very dedicated and passionate group about these topics, and we're going to give you all the feedback we can, and we appreciate that you're thinking about our ideas and that you're incorporating them and working with them as we go forward here. So thanks.
Thank you for having me.
You're welcome. Emily, we have a few items left on the agenda. Could you take us through those, please?
Sure. Just going to share my screen here. Can everyone see my screen?
Yep.
Okay. So just a couple of staff updates from your agenda. I know we're getting close to time here, so I will go through it fairly quickly. And if there's any questions, you can go ahead and ask. 7.0, just letting you know that the city's energy reporting to the province is complete. This happens on an annual basis as part of the broader public sector energy and emissions reporting rather. And we're also looking into some ways to better manage that, which is a recommendation in the GHG reduction plan. So currently looking at things such as Energy Star Portfolio Manager, as well as RET Screen for future energy benchmark analysis for retrofit projects here at the municipality. I think what I'll do is I'll just breeze through these, Donna, if you're okay with it, and leave the questions to the end.
Yes, thank you.
So 7.2, just wanted to do a quick update on the energy literacy webinar series. We've had 2 of the 4 take place. The first one, we had 28 people register, 18 participants, and as of today, 48 views online, which is really great to see. I think people are appreciating the fact that they can go back and review it as their time is more convenient to them. Yesterday, we had our second webinar, and the one that I personally was really looking most forward to, and this was on the home energy retrofit orientation. This is offered by Enbridge and Humber College, and we are the 6th community in the province to actually take advantage of this program, and the first time when it was a partnership between a municipality and a First Nation. So this is really, really great information to get out there for homeowners. Marcus Hines, who did the presentation, he is a mechanical engineer, and he really did a great job at breaking down your home energy system, walking through the retrofit process. The webinar is available, the recording on the city's website, and I really encourage those on this committee, as well as anyone watching at home, to check it out because it did exactly what we were hoping it would do. It can be a little bit daunting and confusing to start in on the retrofit process. And I think it actually ties in very well with the infrared imaging camera borrowing program that we're hopefully going to see with the library soon. So just wanted to do a plug for that one. And a reminder that we do have 2 more webinars left. One later this month and one in November regarding incentives for residential and commercial energy efficiency. So please spread the word, and these will also be available online, the recordings on the city's website. Just wanted to touch base on another project that the city is working on as part of the City Studios initiative. Just as a reminder for those who may not be aware, City Studio has a mission to facilitate collaboration between municipal staff, faculty, at the university, students, and community in order to co-create experiments and solutions for a more sustainable, livable, joyful, and inclusive municipality. So the city is working with Algoma University on a variety of initiatives, one of them being an urban forestry project. So the students from Algoma U will be working and experimenting with different tools to work on some components of what could ultimately contribute to an urban forest management plan. So they'll be working with a tool called iTree, specifically the canopy and eco modules, looking at estimates for tree canopy cover within the municipal boundary, as well as estimates for carbon sequestration from a city park tree inventory that was created a number of years ago. In addition to this, they'll be conducting a literature review regarding urban forest management best practices, all of which will be shared at the end of the year, it's my understanding, just to present their findings to the municipality. So this is a deliverable, part of a deliverable from the GHG reduction plan. So I'm excited to see a bit of work being done on that so far. Just a couple of other updates here. The pre-application that we discussed at the last meeting to the Federation of Canadian Municipalities Community Efficiency Financing Program for a feasibility study was submitted at the end of September. So we're just waiting to hear back regarding if and what the next steps of the full application would be. Hopefully we'll be hearing back soon. I as well have registered for the FCM Sustainable Communities Conference, which will be taking place next week, and hoping to learn some great things there, specifically as it relates to community retrofit programs. And we'll be happy to present the committee with a bit of an overview on the findings there next month. And last but not least, I just wanted to share this page here. This is a new initiative that will be taking place for the committee. So any resources that perhaps you come across in the month that we don't meet, please feel free to send those to me, and I'll include those on a resource slide for anyone who might be interested in reviewing them at a later date. That way we keep people's inboxes clear and we have it all in one central space. So I won't go into detail about all of these, but for you to read at your convenience. So I will stop sharing my screen. I know we're pretty much at time here, but if there's a few quick questions, I'll do my best to answer them. Not seeing any on my end, Donna.
Anybody got questions? I don't see any. Is there a way, Emily, that we could build a resource page? I'm just thinking about how residents could more easily find these ideas that we're sharing that are out there. I'm not sure if we could build a resource page on our committee page on the website. I'm thinking about people not having to drill down into agendas to be able to see these ideas, and perhaps we can be sharing some of them in social media. I don't know what's appropriate, but there's some great things that were brought forward by the group as part of those thoughts. And I know that everybody's really passionate and will continue to do that. So the more that we can share what's going on out in the world in other places around environmental sustainability, I think we all get more educated and excited about what could happen here in Sault Ste. Marie. So 5:29. Anything further before we complete for the day? When is our next meeting, Em?
Our next meeting is in November, and I'm just going to double check here.
It says on our agenda. I didn't get down that far. November 18th.
Perfect. Thank you.
Okay. So seeing nothing further, I just need a mover and a seconder to resolve that we will adjourn this meeting. I'm looking for a couple of hands. Thank you, Mark. Thank you, Eric. Okay. Fantastic. Thanks everyone for your time. We'll continue to move our agenda forward, and we'll see you in a month. Take care.